It starts the way summer afternoons usually do. The yard is still. Sunlight hangs over the grass in a pale, wavering shimmer. The fence casts a thin shadow across the lawn, and somewhere beyond the trees, the distant hum of a lawnmower drifts through the heat. At first, nothing feels unusual. A few leaves move lazily in the breeze. The bird feeder sways almost imperceptibly. Everything looks exactly as it should. But then you notice something. The silence. Not complete silence. Just a different kind of quiet. The kind that settles in slowly enough that most people never realize it arrived. The cheerful calls that filled the morning are gone. The quick flashes of movement between branches have disappeared. Even the squirrels seem less interested in crossing the open yard. The air feels heavier now, almost suspended. You glance toward the maple tree near the back fence. A Northern Cardinal is sitting there, perfectly still. Its red feathers glow against the deep green leaves, bright enough to catch your eye immediately. But something about it feels different. It isn't singing. It isn't hopping from branch to branch. It isn't searching for seeds beneath the feeder. It simply sits there, tucked into a patch of shade, no larger than a dinner plate, waiting, watching, as though the day itself has become something it must endure. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to discover may change the way you look at every bird that visits your yard during the hottest days of summer, and this is where things begin to feel a little strange, because that cardinal wasn't the only one. As the afternoon stretched on and the shadows shortened, more birds seemed to vanish from sight. Not gone, just hidden. And what was happening beyond those quiet branches was far more important than most people realize. You have probably felt it yourself. That moment when you step outside on a summer afternoon and the heat seems to meet you before you even reach the porch. The air feels thicker somehow. The sunlight looks different. Even familiar places seem to slow down beneath it. You find yourself searching for shade without thinking. You carry a cold drink. You shorten the walk. You tell yourself you will stay outside for just a few minutes. And then you go back in. Most of us do. We close the door behind us, and the yard becomes something we glance at through a window. But every now and then, something catches your attention. A bird sitting motionless longer than usual. An empty feeder during hours when it should be busy. A branch that was alive with movement in the morning now standing strangely still beneath the afternoon sun. You notice it, then you forget about it. Most people do, because nothing looks dramatic, nothing looks urgent. The yard still appears peaceful. The flowers still sway gently. The fence still casts its familiar shadow across the grass. Yet something about those afternoons can feel different in ways that are difficult to explain, almost as if the entire landscape is holding its breath. You know that feeling, the sense that something has changed, even when you cannot immediately name what it is. And perhaps that is why certain moments stay with us. A glimpse of a cardinal tucked deep inside the leaves. The absence of birdsong where there should be birdsong. The quiet feeling that the yard is trying to tell you something. But the strange part is this. What you are noticing is not your imagination, and what is happening beyond those shaded branches is far more remarkable than it first appears. The longer you watch, the more you begin to realize that the birds have not disappeared at all. They are still there, hidden beneath layers of leaves, pressed close to the shaded side of tree trunks, resting deep inside shrubs that seem empty from a distance. The yard that appears quiet is actually full of life. You just cannot see most of it anymore. And that is the part many people miss. We tend to think of birds as creatures of motion. We notice them when they flash across the sky, or land at the feeder, or sing from the top of a fence post. But during the hottest hours of the day, much of their world shifts out of sight. What looks like absence is often strategy. What feels like stillness is often survival. If you look carefully toward that same maple tree, you may notice the cardinal has not moved very far at all. The branch it chose is tucked beneath a thick canopy where sunlight barely reaches the bark. A few feet away, another bird sits quietly among the shadows. Neither one is feeding, neither one is calling. They seem almost suspended in time, as though the entire afternoon has slowed around them. This hidden version of the yard exists all summer long. Most people walk past it without ever knowing it is there. They see fewer birds and assume the birds have gone elsewhere. But the truth is stranger than that. The birds are often closer than ever. They are simply living in a different layer of the landscape, one built from shade, shelter, and tiny pockets of relief invisible to human eyes. And once you begin noticing that hidden layer, another question naturally follows. If so many birds are retreating into these small islands of protection, what exactly are they hiding from? The answer begins with something surprisingly simple. Birds do not sweat the way we do. When the temperature climbs higher and higher, they cannot cool themselves by shedding heat through their skin. Instead, they rely on shade, stillness, and tiny adjustments that most people never notice. A cardinal resting quietly beneath dense leaves may look inactive to us, but what you are actually seeing is a carefully calculated response to the environment around it. Researchers have found that small birds can lose water rapidly during periods of intense heat, especially when temperatures push into the upper 90s and beyond. Every unnecessary flight costs energy. Every minute spent in direct sunlight increases stress on the body. Suddenly, that motionless bird in the shade begins to look very different. It is not doing nothing. It is making decisions, quiet ones, invisible ones. The kind that rarely attract attention because they leave no dramatic sign behind. Perhaps that is what makes the natural world so easy to misunderstand. We tend to notice action, we notice movement, but survival often looks surprisingly still. The cardinal remains tucked beneath the canopy. The feeder hangs untouched. The afternoon air shimmers above the lawn. From a distance, everything appears calm. Yet hidden beneath that calm is an entire network of choices being made moment by moment. Which branch offers the deepest shade? Which patch of air feels slightly cooler? Which route requires the least energy to reach? The remarkable thing is that these birds have been solving this puzzle long before any human ever stepped into the yard. But as summers grow hotter and those margins grow smaller, the difference between comfort and survival may come down to something far more ordinary than most people realize. By now, the afternoon has settled fully over the yard. The sunlight that looked golden earlier has turned almost white against the grass. The shadows beneath the trees have become smaller, tighter, more valuable, and somehow your attention keeps returning to the same bird. The cardinal is still there. Not exactly in the same spot, but close. A few feet lower now. A little deeper beneath the leaves. You begin noticing details you might have missed before. The way it pauses between movements, the way it chooses covered branches instead of open ones, the way it seems to know precisely where the coolest pockets of air can be found. And after a while, something unexpected happens. It stops feeling like just another bird passing through. It starts feeling familiar. You have probably experienced this before without realizing it. A bird that appears at roughly the same time each day. A shape you recognize before you consciously identify it. A flash of red near the fence line that feels strangely expected. Over time, the yard develops characters, quiet regulars whose routines overlap with your own. You drink your morning coffee. They visit the feeder. You step outside in the evening. They settle into their favorite branches. No agreement was ever made, yet somehow a relationship forms anyway. Not the kind built from touch or language, but from repetition, presence, recognition. The cardinal does not know your name, but it knows this place. It knows the trees, the shadows, the rhythms of the yard, and perhaps that is why watching it now feels different. Because what you are seeing is no longer an abstract struggle happening somewhere in nature. It is happening here, to a familiar visitor, right in front of you. And this is where the story begins to change. The afternoon continues to deepen. Heat rises from the ground in soft, invisible waves. The lawn that seemed inviting in the morning now looks almost untouched. The feeder remains quiet. The fence posts stand empty. Even the wind appears reluctant to move. And then, without warning, the cardinal leaves the shelter of the maple tree. Not quickly, not dramatically. It simply emerges from the shadows and glides across the yard with a kind of deliberate purpose. You find yourself watching more closely. The flight is short, direct, economical, as though every ounce of energy matters. And perhaps it does. What makes this moment remarkable is not that a bird is moving. It is where it is going. Throughout the yard, there are countless places it could land. Branches, feeders, fences. Yet it ignores them all. The deeper you look into the lives of backyard birds, the more you begin to realize that much of what appears random is anything but. Beneath the surface of everyday behavior is an invisible map, a map built from memory, necessity, and constant calculation. Every shaded branch, every sheltered corner, every reliable resource becomes part of that map. The Cardinal is following one now, not because it wants to, because it needs to. And suddenly, the story feels larger than a single bird sitting quietly in a tree. Across neighborhoods, parks, and backyards, countless birds are making similar journeys at this very moment, following routes humans rarely notice, searching for things we often take for granted. The strange part is that many of these journeys end at the same destination, a destination so ordinary that most people pass by it every day without a second thought. And once you notice it, you may never look at your yard the same way again. The destination turns out to be almost disappointingly ordinary. A shallow basin of water sitting quietly beneath the afternoon sun. Perhaps it is tucked beside a flower bed. Perhaps it rests near a shrub you planted years ago. You may have walked past it 100 times without giving it much thought, yet the Cardinal approaches it with a level of certainty that feels impossible to ignore. It lands nearby first, pauses, looks around, then moves closer. There is nothing dramatic about the moment, no grand reveal, no obvious signal that anything important has happened, and yet something about it feels significant. The bird lowers its head, drinks, lifts its head again, drinks once more. Tiny movements measured in seconds. But when you have spent the afternoon watching the yard grow quieter and stiller, those few seconds seem to carry unexpected weight. Many people believe that the most important things happening around us are also the most visible. The loudest, the largest, the easiest to notice. Nature often works differently. Sometimes the difference between struggle and relief can be measured in something as simple as a few inches of water. Something about that feels difficult to ignore, perhaps because it reminds us how interconnected even ordinary places can become. The shade of a tree, the position of a shrub, a small source of water left waiting beneath the summer sky. None of these things seem remarkable on their own, yet together they form a quiet network of refuge that countless creatures depend upon without ever announcing it. And as the Cardinal remains there for another moment, feathers glowing softly against the fading light, it becomes easier to understand why so many people feel there is something deeper hidden within these encounters. Not supernatural, not mystical, just a quiet reminder that life is often sustained by things we barely notice until we truly begin paying attention. The afternoon is beginning to loosen its grip now. The sunlight softens. Shadows stretch across the yard once again. Somewhere in the distance, a breeze finally stirs the leaves that had been motionless for hours. The Cardinal remains near the water for a moment longer before lifting into the branches above. Not hurried, not exhausted, simply continuing with the quiet rhythm of its day. And somehow, the yard no longer looks the same. Nothing has changed physically. The same trees stand where they always stood. The same fence traces the edge of the property. The same birdbath rests beneath the sky. Yet once you have seen what was happening beneath the surface, it becomes difficult to unsee it. You begin looking differently. The patch of shade beneath a shrub is no longer just shade, it is shelter. The cluster of leaves near the fence is no longer just part of the landscape, it is a refuge. Even the stillness itself feels different now. Not empty, not lifeless. Full of hidden decisions and quiet acts of endurance unfolding beyond human attention. Perhaps that is why moments like this stay with people. Not because they reveal something extraordinary, but because they reveal something ordinary that was always there. Something we had simply overlooked. There is a certain humility in that realization. The understanding that entire worlds can exist alongside our own, without asking to be noticed. Entire struggles unfolding in silence beneath branches we pass every day. As evening light settles gently across the lawn, the yard begins to fill with movement again. A distant call, the flutter of wings, a bird crossing from one tree to another, life returning to view. And for the first time all day, you understand that it never truly left. By the time the last light begins to fade beyond the trees, the yard feels different from the one we started with, not because anything extraordinary appeared, not because some great mystery revealed itself, but because a quiet truth has settled into place. The Cardinal eventually leaves the water and disappears into the evening shadows. The branches sway gently above the lawn. The air cools. The familiar sounds of dusk begin to return. And yet, something lingers. You realize that all day long, life was unfolding around you in ways that were almost invisible. Small decisions, small journeys, small acts of endurance. The kind that rarely make themselves known. Perhaps that is why moments like these stay with us. They remind us that the world is far more alive than it appears at first glance. That beneath ordinary afternoons and familiar landscapes are countless stories happening just beyond our attention. Many people spend their lives searching for meaning in distant places, yet sometimes meaning arrives quietly, perched on a shaded branch, asking only to be noticed. Thank you for staying until the very end and sharing this moment with me. If you enjoy stories like this, stories that reveal the hidden lives unfolding just outside our windows, consider subscribing before you leave, because there are still so many things out there that most of us have never truly seen. And perhaps that is the most beautiful part. Tomorrow morning, the yard will look ordinary again. The feeder, the fence, the trees, the water resting beneath the sky, but maybe now you will see them differently. And maybe, somewhere outside your window tonight, something small and feathered is settling into the darkness, carrying on a story that never really ended when this one did. Maybe it was only a bird, but somehow, it never felt like only a bird.